to make it. Okay, so there we go. Okay. So I'm not sure what everybody's level of expertise that are here, what that level is. And so just really quickly to review the executive function aspect of this, executive functions are, any cognitive skill that we use to reach a goal. And really, the importance of executive functions come into play because we use them every day, all of us, no matter who we are. And why does it matter? Because individuals that tend to have weak executive function skills have missed deadlines, disorganization, and overwhelm. Fun fact, executive functions develop into the late 20s, early 30s. Research used to say mid 20s, but that we've done some more current research that has found that it is late 20s, early 30s. I actually don't love talking about time management and planning and organization with individuals that are new to the executive function world, which can be confusing sometimes because when more often than not, when people think of executive functions, they're thinking of planning, organization, and time management. But the reality is these are higher level executive functions, which means we really don't develop these executive functions and are able to successfully do them independently until we have foundational executive functions in place, like working memory, regulation, and flexibility. This is an activity that I really love doing with individuals, and I utilize this to help me gather information when I'm doing things like calendars, organizations, and planning, and things like that. If you use the QR code, that will take you to the activity. It will walk you through the activity. It will also give a video that will have an explanation of the video. So you are welcome to go ahead and sign up for that. It will ask you for your email, but it's a very fun activity. And I think that after today, I just thought it was important to share because it really does apply to a lot of this. And really, it applies to it because I firmly am a believer that all of our brains are unique, and what works for one person is not necessarily what is going to work for another person. And I do think that is one big difference when it comes to executive function specialist, is that we use the information that we gather from a variety of different sources to really see what our clients need from a cognitive perspective, rather just using tools that we have heard of that might work for them, that we really do trial and error to figure out that right tool. Another thing that I commonly get asked is your course appropriate for adults? Because some people just work with adults, or some people work with students and adults. And in my opinion, the reality is we all have executive functions. We all have strengths, we all have weaknesses. But when we're talking about executive function skills and often strategies and techniques, we use the same strategies and techniques for all ages. It's just that we modify them often to be age appropriate. And so I always say my course will meet the need of anybody because you really are getting the science behind things as well as the additional strategies and techniques, and they can just be tweaked for that developmental age. So, like I said, it's similar skills at every age, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, is using calendars and kind of going through the lifespan and how that skill of using a calendar changes with every age group. And I thought January was the perfect month to do this because so many people like to start a fresh calendar at the beginning of the new year, or try to use a calendar again for the first time in January because it's the beginning of the year. Some of the things that calendars really help us with in connection to executive functions can be visual representation of time. So Many of our students really struggle with time, and calendars can kind of ground them in that time. And it also helps individuals avoid cognitive overload. It's actually quite ironic. I just ended a call with my med student, and we were taking he has an exam in 2 weeks, and we were taking his study plan to a calendar. And he was talking about how he very rarely uses his calendar, which is something I know and something that we're going to be working on. But also feels that he's stressed out all the time because he's trying to remember what he has to do. And that is probably because he's going into cognitive overload, trying to keep all of this in mind while all this other medical information in mind and trying to juggle it. And so it really will help with that cognitive overload and also that visual representation of time. Um, this is a chart that Caroline Maguire put in a book of hers, I think, or something, and it was actually adapted from Sarah Ward. And the reason I really like this is because it tells us how far in the future individuals can see by age. Now, whenever I show something to someone and say that it's, based on age or grade, the other thing I want to remind individuals is that if you know you are working with someone who has an executive function deficit, we can probably take we can subtract 3 years because of that delay that we're going to see. And more often than not, it's definitely there when it comes to planning, organization, and time management, but not all the time. Everybody's different. So when we look at this, we're going to start with younger kids first, focusing on, kind of up to 8 years old. And when we're looking at that group, you can see how it can go from now, if someone's 2, to if they're 8 years old, it's 8 to 12 hours. So that means they're only able to see into the future 8 to 12 hours. And so that is something we're going to keep in mind as we work with someone who is a certain age, is how far can they see in the future? When we're working with children that are this young, I know personally as a coach, very rarely do I work with children this young unless I've already done a parent coaching course, meaning I've already worked with the parents and I've established an executive function foundation for the family. And that is really important in my opinion. I love a quote from Peg Dawson's book, one of the authors of Smart But Scattered, where she talks about how we have to have environmental changes before we can have changes for a child. And so, considering that, that is why it's even more important at these early ages that we're actually helping parents put some of these things in mind. Now, I will say some parents are hesitant about parent coaching. Sometimes they take on this feeling that there's something wrong with them and their parenting skills because we're asking them to do some parent coaching. And one of the things I try to do to kind of relieve that feeling in parents is I explain to them that most of us have been parented by parents that were parented by neurotypical parents who were parenting neurotypical kids. When we parent kids that are neurodivergent, um, it's really important to understand that brain science, which means that it's all new. It's a different style of parenting. So we wouldn't expect somebody who was parented by a parent who was, parenting neurotypical kids to be able to, or know how to parent someone who's neurodivergent. And so it's new information for them often. So we don't expect them to know it. And so lots of times that will alleviate some of those guilty feelings like they're not doing something right, or there's something wrong that they don't know how to work with their kids. So the focus should be, when we're working with this age group, visual schedules with pictures for routines. That's one of the things that we want to make sure that we focus on with calendars. Introduction of basic concepts being days of the week, months, right? Like different things like that. Building a sense of time and predictability This is really crucial. Many of us that work with older students know that our students struggle with time management. And a lot of that goes back to the fact that they can't even sense time. And so we want to make sure that that is a focus at this younger age. And then introducing beginning planning and organization skills. Just because those are higher executive functions doesn't mean that we cannot introduce and work on them. It's just that we're aware that they're not developmentally ready for them, which means we're going to be doing a lot of modeling at this age. On the left, we have an example of a calendar that would probably be found in a preschool or early elementary school. And then on the right, this was a calendar, I think, from a third grade classroom. So you can see how they're bright, they're visual, there's focus on the dates and the months and things like that. And that is because we're introducing those concepts. And this is what you might see in an education environment. So as I mentioned, I'm usually working with parents when I'm working with kids this young. And one of the things I like to ask them to do is set up sort of a command center if possible. The picture on the left has popped up on my social media so many times in the last month um, because this company is selling this system, which is really nice. I mean, it has like a chalkboard calendar and it has a to-do list and a little bulletin board and things like that. So it's a very nice version of it. It cost a lot though. The one on the right was something I found on Pinterest that I absolutely loved. And I'm curious, what is one thing that you see in the picture on the right that will make an impact that you do not see on the left when we're talking about executive functions? Any guesses? And you can just say it out loud. How about the clock? So we see an analog clock on the right picture, and we don't see that on the left. If you are teaching a student who is younger how to use a calendar system, again, we're trying to learn that perception of time. Having an analog clock is crucial. Um, Analog clocks show the passage of time. And so when we have a system like this, we're not only able to be kind of referring the student to the calendar, but we also can refer them to the clock, which is very, very important. So for example, if we knew that a student had baseball on the 21st, we would be recommending, that the parent be talking to the student saying, they're getting home from school, have them stand in front of the command center going, okay, you're home now, we're going to have a snack. And then when the clock says 3:15, we're going to get ready for baseball, which means you're going to go upstairs, get changed, grab your cleats, come downstairs, get your water bottle ready. Now, all of that might need a list too. I'm keeping that in mind. And then at 4 o'clock, we're going to leave for baseball. There might also be a bunch of other tools that are involved with this process, but I'm just focusing on the calendar and the analog clock at this point. Here's an example of another system that can be used at home, which can be really, really helpful, again, to show some of that passage of time. And that is using the clock with colors. And so, for example, from 3 to 5, the child will be in playtime. From 5 to 6 is homework. They know that 8 to 8:30 is pajama, lights out. So having those colors, this is especially good if we go back to the candy exercise. Once you do it, if you are someone who thinks in color, a system like this can work really, really well. It also works really, really well for kids who have sometimes dyscalculia because they have difficulties reading the number, and so the color can replace the numbers a little bit. I see that there's a couple things in the chat box, so I'm just going to look really quickly just to see if there's anything. Oh, you guys were answering in the box. Awesome. Perfect. Okay, awesome. Okay, so the other thing I often hear from parents is, okay, I have no problem, having a calendar, having a system that I'm, sharing with my child, making sure they're part of the process, but I have a digital system. And I'm not going to recreate a calendar on a whiteboard or on a bulletin board or something else when I already have a system in place. And that is where there are two companies that I'm aware of right now that have systems that work really well for families like this. This is called a DAC board, DAK. I believe you can get them on Amazon. If not, they have their own web page, and it syncs with the parent's digital calendar. And so all the information can be displayed, and you can see that there are two different versions that can be displayed. You have the calendar, and then you can also switch to the individual activities that are happening too. So it's a really nice tool for families that, one, can afford it. We have to keep realistic in that aspect. And then two, who do not want to recreate the wheel. This is actually a system I really, really like. And this is by a company called Skylight. I have a smaller version of it. And it's really nice because, again, it has that system that syncs with the digital calendar. It can be posted on the wall. This is really nice in a lot of families like this because you can also have an individual's list of items. And then when they're put on the calendar, the individual has a color. So this tends to be a very nice system. It also, it's not shown here, has like a chore list that you can have your child doing and then checking off on it when they've completed the chore. So it's just another system that is out there that can help families not have to recreate the wheel. So I mentioned before that we do a lot of teaching and modeling in preschool through 8, right? Age 8. That's one of the things that we're doing. And if we understand the science of the brain and understand that every single time that we build a new skill, we are actually creating a neural pathway. That is what we're doing. And we create neural pathways with repetition. And so helping parents realize that, as well as kids, that the more that we do something, the more that we practice something, the stronger we become at that, at that skill. That's really important, I think, to kind of teach kids that brain science. And in fact, like I have little stuffed neurons that I use with my students to kind of show that connection and show how it works. For parents, what I like to talk about a little bit is the science that we have found through research on executive functions and ADHD, which kind of go to hand in hand, but sometimes we can have individuals that have executive function challenges without having ADHD. That actually the space between two neurons is called a synapse, and that synapse is actually larger for these individuals. So what does that mean? It takes longer for the message to carry from one neuron to another neuron, which means it is harder to create these neural pathways. It's not as easy for someone who is neurotypical. And so sometimes parents just having an understanding that the message is taking longer to get from one neuron to another neuron, it can be very helpful for them to understand why their kids act certain ways in certain situations. If I'm working with educators, I always like to say, if you're asking a question to a class, you have sometimes a student who's going to blurt out the answer, and that is because the message to raise their hand is taking longer to get from one neuron to another neuron. So it kind of works like that, where we see that impulsive, spontaneous behavior rather than, pausing and realizing, oh, I need to raise my hand. So sometimes having that understanding can be really important because it helps families realize that learning executive functions is more like a journey, and sometimes it takes longer for some individuals than other individuals. So when we get to ages 12 through 16, they can see 2 to 3 days in the future. And I think this is really ironic because if you look at calendar systems in middle school and planning systems, we often are starting to teach students how to plan for long-term projects independently. And if we look at this and consider this, they are nowhere near developmentally ready for that. And so, as coaches, I think we already know that, a lot of us. And we already know that ages 12 through 16 is a lot of teaching, modeling, introducing, because these are the ages where they're starting to get multiple teachers, which means it's a lot more difficult to track all that information. And again, if we're teaching them a little bit about cognitive overload and working memory, we know that they can only hold about 4 items in mind. It's important to kind of keep that in mind and teach them that, so that, like, hey, if you're thinking about your new video game that's coming out on Tuesday, and the fact that you have to contact Johnny and Billy to kind of set up a time to play the new video game, well, you've already used 2 of those 4 spots. And so if you have homework in 3 classes, you're probably not going to remember what all of that is done, all that you have to do if you haven't written that down. So having those examples to kind of show the why, instead of just telling them you really need to use your planner, it just makes a lot more sense sometimes. There's obviously digital and physical types of planning systems. As a coach, I find that ages 12 through 16, what I'm doing is introducing students to a variety of different tools. I'm having them try those different tools to find the right tool for them. And, last year, 2024, I spent a lot of time with different colleagues and different groups. And one of the things that I kept on hearing over and over was everybody's favorite systems. I heard about Notability, which is my favorite. I heard of GoodNotes. I heard of OneNote. All these different programs that people are using to either take their notes or keep track of their systems, but everybody was talking about different programs. And that's because we've already kind of figured it out without talking about it, but we're all using tools that work for us, that work for our brain. And we have to acknowledge that this is the same for our students. They have to find the tool that's right for them. And so I introduce them to a variety of digital and physical, and we try them out for periods of time. Sometimes I start with digital, depending on who the individual is, because I notice that a student will be more likely to try something digital before they will try something on paper. I do always find it ironic that a lot of students will eventually come to me and go, I think I need to use that paper agenda, or I want to use a bullet journal or something like that. And sometimes they will go to paper, but they're making the move. So for physical, we see agendas, we see planners, we see calendars, we see bullet journals, and all of these are using calendar systems to keep track of when we have to do things. Some examples there's a variety of different ones too, right? We have the agenda and planners that have a week at a glance. We have some that have daily boxes, some that are just a month at a time, some that have both. But those are what we usually see in a written version, even if we're creating our own and say a bullet journal. If you are keeping a planner, can you tell me what your preferences are? Do you like seeing the whole week? Or do you prefer daily boxes, like being on one page, or just a few daily boxes on one page? Does anybody have a preference when they're using their system?
I
If
have a preference. I need both the week and then I also need to be able to see the day when like it comes up. So like I need to see like everything that's happening this week, but then when it comes to like actually day of, I need to see it listed out like that.
Right, right. Yeah, awesome. Anybody else? Okay. So, these are 2 examples, and I know the one on the left looks like it might be digital, but this is actually a very old school thing. This was actually one of the first things I created for the second student I ever worked with, and he was an individual who had dysgraphia and did not like writing in a planner because he hated writing, and writing wasn't easy for him. And so I created this system for him, and we would print it out and it would go in a binder, and he could just check boxes and only had to write some things if it was absolutely necessary. So, for example, If you had an essay, what was the topic, how many words? Or if you had to study for a quiz, what was it for, or what was the topic? But very little writing was involved. And so he was more likely, and he did use this system rather than a lot of the other systems that he had been introduced to. The one on the right is a system that I created with a kid who had just entered middle school, excuse me. And we created in Canva. We had a lot of fun. We did it together. Kind of a quirky kid. He was a little bit artistic, which was kind of cool. And this is how he wanted his weekly planner set up, and did something similar where we printed out the sheets and then he would just put them in the binder and he would have them ready to go for his school days. He actually really preferred this over the agenda that he had been given in school. This is a traditional agenda that a lot of kids are using. And you can see here where it has the days of the week, and then it also has the classes listed. This is really nice. I find that students that are using them like having the classes already there. But more often than not, I find that students only use these for the bathroom pass that's in the back. So that is what they use it for. This is actually mine, and it's what I actually use with my college students. I keep track of their due dates like this. Some might consider this digital. I actually put it under physical because I needed physical things to kind of do it. And it's just something that I downloaded on Etsy, and then I like to put it into GoodNotes, and then I use an iPencil. And as you can see, I'm somebody who thinks in color, and so every class is a different color, and it's a system that makes sense to me. But it's kind of using old school planner agenda sort of things, but keeping track of it digitally on a device with using an iPencil and using it that way. So we also, at this age, are not only talking about daily planning, but we are starting to introduce that idea of forward planning. And so that is why it is very important to let our students, be aware that having a calendar is also essential. Now, even a calendar people use in different ways. And so, for me, keeping track of my college students' items, I will give them reminders if they need them about like what they need to read or a homework assignment or something like that. But on the month calendar is where I really keep track of the, kind of the more important things, which are papers and exams. And that is what I track on the calendar. Obviously, we would have to see what the student required, but we're going to model that even, and I haven't gotten to this age group yet, but this is what I model for my college students, because often I find that, especially if I'm getting a college student for the first time, like I did not work with them in high school, lots of them are not using systems. And so therefore, I that's why I do this, is to keep track of their things. I don't share it with them necessarily. There are some coaches out there that actually create the system for their college students. I do not do that. But I do make sure that they're on top of things by reviewing what they have to do every week, and sometimes showing them photographs of my pages or sharing a page and saying, well, this is how I have your week planned. This is how I have it on my planner. This is how I have it on my calendar. So that I'm still doing that modeling and teaching, but I'm not necessarily giving it to them at that college age. Obviously, I feel like the younger students, they require a lot more help because we're still modeling and teaching. Bullet journals are something that a lot of individuals really like. And I had quite a few individuals that really enjoyed using them in high school. And Ryder Carroll is the one who actually kind of created the idea of a bullet journal. And his system is very detailed. It has like there's an index and there's a lot of things involved. I find that people that usually transition into bullet journals are not really using that system. They're just using some concepts from the system. So you can see here some, different versions of what we can see in a bullet journal. We can also see that it can be really fancy or it can be plain depending on the individual. I had one student in high school. It was very plain. It was all words and it, was set up so that it made sense for him and that's how he successfully used it. Here are just some other versions of it. And you can just see again how some people are setting it up by day with the date. We have other people that are just making more lists, like a today list. So it really can be set up in different ways to kind of meet the needs of an individual. For digital, it would be impossible to name every digital program that is out there because they're constantly coming out with new ones. I'm going to mention some of the ones that are more common than others, I think. And we have programs, we have apps, and then we also have calendars with reminders. They're kind of the three digital things that we see. Shovel is a really great program. I used it years ago and I really did love it. Unfortunately, I used it early in its career and there were some issues that they were having, but I did meet with the creator a couple months ago and it really seems to be stable now. And one of the reasons I really love it is because it will sync with the school systems, most of them, not all of them. And it also has a great planning tool that is built right into it that will help a student estimate how long things are going to take and then keeps track of those things if the student is using the timer. So it's a really, really great system. You pay, if they still have it set up the same way, it's a one-time fee. And if you're curious about it at all, I do have a code for it somewhere. So if you are looking into it and need information, let me know and I can give you a code for it. This is just an example of that planning tool that's built into it that you can kind of click when you create a thing. And that can either be a study plan for an exam, it can be a long-term project. You can chunk things and break it down, but it's just a really nice little system that it has in there. Notion, I like to mention Notion because there are a lot of individuals that like it. It personally does not work for my brain at all. I've tried it a few times and I find it very difficult to work with. And so normally what I do is ask some of my either coaches who are using it or college students to make videos for me so that I can show younger individuals, but it's just not my favorite. Notion can be synced with a calendar also. It has to-do list. It has areas to do class notes, budget tracker, grade tracker. So it just has a whole bunch of things. I know I currently have a coach who is working with one student and they're incorporating coding somehow. I really don't know how that works, but I know that that student really became intrigued with it when he heard coding was involved. So that is something they're doing. And this is just an example of kind of what the to-do list could look like, and the class notes and different things like that. Trello is another program that some students really, really like. And actually, this is a version of a Trello board that is currently being used for a student of mine who I worked with in high school, never committed to a system in high school, tried a variety of them, but never was committed. And then the first day of college was like, I'm going to use Trello. I like Trello because she had been introduced to it and she liked it and she has been using it. She's getting ready to graduate and she's been using it ever since. So this is just a picture of her Trello board. And what's really, really nice is that there is a calendar like little upgrade that you can use so that if you put the dates in that previous can I get back to the previous one? Let's see. Yes, I can. Whoops, nope. This just did this really wrong. Whoops. Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. Just go through a couple slides. There we go. So if you see here, she put due dates, and once she does that on the calendar app, she could just push a button and she can see it on the calendar, which is really nice for daily planning and forward planning. So it works out really well for her. Obviously, Google's out there. A lot of people really, really like Google. I find a lot of coaches like Google. And so Google is an option, and obviously it has a lot of bells and whistles that are built into it too, like, the My Tasks and different things like that. My Homework is an app, and this is can actually be really good for coaches. You can see on the left-hand side it says Coaching Home because you can actually pay to have keep track of your students' My Homework app. And so this is a nice app. Syncs with some program schools, not all schools, not most of schools don't are not included. And but the students can easily kind of put their system in there and it works pretty easy. And this also can sync to their calendar, which is really nice. To Do app, To Do app was originally owned by one person, and then I think Microsoft bought it. I found that the original one was one that looks slightly different, but not a lot. Ironically, I found that a lot of my students that were on the autism spectrum, for some reason, liked this app, and I could get them to use this app when I could not get them to use anything else. So there was something about the way that this was set up that just worked for their brain. It can be synced with a calendar, and so you can have it.
Share with you today an easy way to make the Wonder Time clock. The Wonder
I'm not sure. Is somebody asking a question? Okay, not sure. Um, so yes, so To Do app is something that can be utilized as well. And like I said, for some reason, it tend to work with those students more so than others. This is an app that was shared with me a couple weeks ago. It's called the ADHD Schedule Planner. And I personally, this does not make sense to my brain, but it might for some people. And again, it kind of uses this color wheel to show when are things planned, and it shows up with colors. I didn't have a lot of stuff. On the left-hand side, I had a little bit scheduled. On the right, it was kind of a lighter day, so you could see how the one on the left is a little bit busier, and then on the one on the right is less busy. But that's how it shows up, is the times show up in the wheels. I think if you upgrade it and pay for it, you can actually get the wheel to include like different colors for different things. So that could be an option as well. So I introduced a majority of the tools when I was focusing on that last age group because moving forward as college students and adults, this is what those are all the systems that we're kind of using too, right? They're very similar. And so I didn't feel like I had to repeat them in each section. What I'm going to do now is focus on, again, how the changes happen when you go into a new developmental group. So college students can see about 2 to 3 weeks in the future. So keeping that in mind, we know that in college, really the focus becomes managing complex calendars. Most of them are used to a system where they get homework and they have to do in a day or two. They might be used to having some long-term projects, but they are not used to being handed a syllabi the first day where they're getting everything for the entire semester. And so they're going from this place where it's like getting fed the information little by little to all of a sudden, here's all this information. Also, managing school and life responsibilities. I have a student I'm meeting with later today, and we are going to be setting up like a something in Google Sheets to talk about where she should be doing her laundry, where she should be, doing some of the more life skill things, because she's having a little bit of difficulty in college. Managing the life responsibility. She's doing really well on the school side, but she's doing laundry at like 3 o'clock in the morning because she forgot about it or, things like that. So that's what we're seeing in college. Ironically, I have a student who I've worked on and off with since 8th grade, and he is now in his first year of law school. And one of the shifts that I saw was that in college, and we only meet with like 15 minutes a week because we've met for so long. We that in like undergrad, the focus was more on academics. It was planning, it was study schedules, different things like that. Now that he's in law school, it's more about how do I eat healthy? Where do I fit in my exercise? Just more of those life things. So it's kind of been interesting to see the shift and the fact that he has the school stuff down pat, but now at, grad level, he's having to be like, oh, now I'm trying to figure out, where I fit life in. And then more students become more responsible for their own calendars. Hopefully, that is the goal, and more independent in these skills. I do find it ironic sometimes that there are a lot of families out there, parents that are keeping their colleges like their college kids' schedule, like when it comes to like family obligations and things still. So there are families that are supporting students in that way. But the goal is obviously to get them to be more responsible themselves and independent in these skills. So that is what we're focusing on in the college years. I find that if I work with students in high school and I'm introducing those systems and I'm modeling them and I'm teaching them, that college first semester, they usually pick the tool that they like and they're using it from day one. A couple of years ago, I had 3 high school students that I followed into college at the same time, and it was quite interesting because all 3 struggled with systems in high school, introduced them to many. They used some for a period of time and then they would stop using it. And each of them picked a tool the first week of college and they successfully used it. One was a Trello board, one was a whiteboard system. It was had a whiteboard calendar, and then it had a smaller whiteboard. And then the third one was actually using something on Google that they had created for themselves. But each of them used a system that was worked for their brain and were on track because they had seen so much modeling. They had practiced so much in high school, they were able to transition into that quite easily. So let's talk about professionals. So professionals have to schedule meetings, deadlines, travel, and personal appointments. And I had the most interesting experience with this webinar. As many of you know, it was scheduled originally in the beginning of the month. Unfortunately, I traveled and I came back with bronchitis, which then turned into pneumonia, and I had to transfer that to today. I had it later in the afternoon today before I had done forward planning for one thing, but not another thing, and that was my students. And so I was in California earlier this week doing a conference and realized I had to transfer some of my students to Thursday. And so we moved that webinar from 4:30 to noon, and it was going to be at noon. On Monday, I was in California and I looked at my calendar doing some forward planning and I couldn't honestly remember what time I had scheduled the webinar for today because I knew I had so many other things going on. So I looked at the schedule and it said it was 9 a.m. And so I contacted my assistant and I said, oh, please send out a reminder email just letting people know it's going to be at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I thought I was crazy scheduling it at 9 a.m., especially when I didn't fly back till last night after 9 o'clock. But I was like, okay, that must be just how my day worked out. Well, this morning I realized when I looked at my calendar again that it was showing me in Pacific Standard Time, not Eastern Standard Time. And so, I think in the professional level, especially if we are doing any traveling, that is something else as a skill that we have to figure out as professionals is if traveling is involved and we're using different time zones, or even if we are seeing individuals in a different time zone, we have to look at our calendars a little bit different. So another thing that I've had to do in the past year or two is I work with students all over. I had a student in Brazil who moved to China. In Brazil, their time change happened at a different time. Like it was just not the same week. And so I always, or maybe they didn't do a time change. No, they I think they did there, but it was still slightly different for a period of time. And so I would literally leave an hour before I met with that student and an hour after because the family as a whole didn't have great executive function skills. And so often when time change happened, it took us a couple of weeks to get into the groove of the student coming at the correct time. Now she lives in China. They don't do a time change at all. And so that's been kind of fascinating because I do a time change, they're still in the same time, but I have to figure out as a professional how to put the student in my calendar to make sure that I can see them at the time that we have scheduled. So that's kind of been fascinating as a professional dealing with different individuals in different areas, having to kind of juggle that piece on my calendar. So that's been something that's different. Sometimes we use shared calendars, so it's not unusual as professionals to not just see your own calendar, but to see other calendars as well. And then our focus is usually more on productivity and the work-life balance. And so we can see here, we're all using the same calendar from preschool up to professional, ages, but it's the developmental shifts that happen that change the way we use that tool. And so that is the big difference that we have. So I'm leaving you guys with this. If you have not had access to the free mini course yet, you're welcome to go ahead and access that. And it will give you an idea of kind of what my program is like. But in the meantime, I also, and I think I have the QR code on the next one. I do. Yep. Okay. But in the meantime, love to open up any questions that you might have on any of the systems that we've talked about or any of those developmental changes that happen in those age groups. Any questions? And you can take yourself off of mute and just ask if you'd like. Everybody says,
Krista, what are your thoughts on younger kiddos, like middle school, new to middle school, who are insistent on using a digital planner because they're pretty savvy with their phones, versus trying the paper as well? I know we're supposed to go with what works for them, but when it doesn't seem to be working, what kind of magic wand do you have to convince them to try the paper version?
I make deals with them. So I say, happy, like, yeah, let's start with the digital. But, let's consider that if we try this for a couple weeks and we're finding that, things are being skipped or missed or, whatever's happening, then, will you be open-minded to trying, a paper one?
Right.
So that is how I usually do it. I'll be honest with you. I actually love when they use digital personally because
Okay.
often I can log into those systems and I can see if they're actually using them on a more daily basis.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. But again, I just am such a firm believer that we have to find the right tool for the right person. So I'm always willing to try what they want to try, but I definitely make deals with my students sometimes where I'm like, okay, if this doesn't work, like, are you open to like trying it my way?
Right, yes.
Doing it that
Yes.
way. Yeah. Any other questions? I know calendars are pretty explanatory. I guess what I'm hoping that everybody walks away with today is just this idea that having one tool is used over a lifespan. It's just that we adjust it, understanding the brain science for that age group, because that is what I think is really imperative, is understanding that when we're asking middle schoolers to use planners, we're actually asking them to do something that's pretty unrealistic for them at that point developmentally, even for our neurotypical kids. And so just making sure that we're supporting them in a way that we're understanding the brain science and then also understanding their unique needs and what's going to work best for them. So thank you for coming, and thank you everyone for being flexible today, using our flexibility skills, especially with my calendar mishap that happened, that professionally I will never make that mistake again in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.